So thanks very much for being available this afternoon, and I think we can jump to it. So I've noticed a couple of people that around the table that don't know us yet, that we haven't had a chance to meet for the moment. So I just wanted to start this webinar, obviously by thanking you guys for connecting and saying I'm glad to have a chance to hopefully connect with you in the future, but just to walk you through what we do here at Energie in Paris is we're basically an energy service company with two different teams. We support energy consumers in reducing their carbon footprint and financing their projects and they allow them to reduce their energy consumption through our financial services team. So basically, we're going to walk clients through especially what the white certificates program in France, the CEE. We also support people from other kinds of subsidies regarding energy topics overall. The team organized the presentation today is the consulting team. I'm going to walk you through what we do exactly in the consulting team, but we're the ones that took the pen to try to review the EU ETS market and organize the webinar this afternoon. AC is a rather small company. We're not even 5 years old yet. We're going to be in a few months. We've turned in 40 million euros of turnover in 2022. I'm waiting for the numbers for 2023. And we're roughly slightly less than 50 people overall. And regarding the consulting team, especially, basically we address 4 different groups of clients. We address investors, investment funds, to help them walk the talk in terms of shifting capital towards low carbon projects. So helping them navigate through the difficulties of the energy markets and the complexity of energy or carbon markets, and helping them, especially in due diligence aspects, whenever they make a commitment to a company. Our historical clients are mainly energy-intensive industries, where we work with basically 3 functions. The 3 main functions in industrial sites that are exposed to energy topics, one being energy sourcing teams, whether that's signing PPAs, drafting hedging strategies, negotiating contracts, this kind of topics. We also address operations and especially operational excellence to help them bring a culture, bring a tools and standards, bring a mindset of energy-oriented people. And we work with strategy departments, more or less, to either work on climate neutrality roadmaps or deep dive into specific investment decisions on climate-driven investments. And I'm not going to spend too much time on our 2 other populations of clients, green tech startups and public entities. They're further away from the scope of the webinar this afternoon. The webinar itself is going to be structured around, we're going to take roughly 30 minutes to try to review 3 main aspects. The first one is, let's say, a reminder, an overview of what the EU ETS was and is, what are the operating principles, what have been the last few changes, the latest updates in the past few months, and we're going to try to share with you our insights on how we think these updates are going to impact the market as a whole. And we'll keep a few minutes at the end of the webinar to answer any questions. Feel free to ask them either on the chat, or I think there's a specific question module through the tool that we're using today. Regarding the ETS, sorry if this is if I'm opening already open doors for some people, but basically it's a market in which greenhouse gas emitters can buy allowances from EU member states to make sure that what they emit is compliant to EU regulations. So member states are going to put, especially through auctions, allowances for people to buy. And it's not because you're the one that bought them that it has your name tag on it. You can decide to sell them, to trade them with other emitters that needs to make sure they're compliant as well. And that selling can be done either as on OTC, over-the-counter transactions, or on a specific marketplace, which is EEX in Europe. That's not the main, that's not the only mechanism through which you can get allowances. There's a very big mechanism, very important mechanism in which you can get allowances, which is a free allowance mechanism, under which, depending on what you produce and how much of it you produce, you have a right to get, as an emitter, a certain amount of allowances, of allocations, for free. And typically what's going to happen is that people who need less allocations than what they get can sell those allocations to people who need more allocations than what they get for free. And that's the main driver in terms of what is being sold and traded on the market. Overall, the volumes of those mechanisms is slightly below half of the total market volumes for free allocations, free allowances, and slightly above 50% for allowance that are auctioned by the states directly. So 43% for, let's say, this 50%, 55%, sorry, on the primary market directly. There also is another third mechanism, which is very small, regarding credits, carbon credits or offsets, under which certified organizations can justify that you helped finance projects that allow to reduce CO2, and therefore give you the right to give someone else the right to emit CO2 on the other hand. But it's been increasingly small in the total amount of allowances on the market today. So that's for how it works in terms of scope. Overall, the sectors that are covered by the EU ETS represent, roughly speaking, half of the national emissions, European emissions on the soil of the European Union, basically half. The sectors themselves has been extended throughout time. It started off with only power generation and a few sectors of energy-intensive industries, and it's been expanded to other sectors, aviations and other industrial sectors. In the same way, it's been extended to other geographies to include more and more countries, except for UK who left, but overall to include more countries in the total ETS. That scope of greenhouse gas emitters has been reducing its CO2 emissions, its greenhouse gas emissions, slightly faster than the rest of Europe. Slightly faster in the sense that overall in Europe we've seen a decrease of roughly 2% per year, whereas for the sectors specifically in the ETS, that reduction has been around 3.3% per year. So slightly faster. That needs to be put into perspective on the fact that it mainly comes, if you look at the different bars in the chart, it mainly comes from the first one, the combustion sector, which is basically combustion for power plants and combustion for industrial plants who produce their own utilities, especially steel production. So the decline has been faster for EU ETS plants, but actually it's more specifically on a rather narrow area that is the combustion sector. In terms of price, that's for the scope, and in terms of price, the price has quite drastically increased in the last few years. What happened is, at the beginning of that mechanism, back in 2005, the market was between 20 and 30 euros per ton of CO2. It declined at the end of phase one because allocations from phase one couldn't be shifted towards phase two, so they had less and less value. But overall, if you take apart the end of phase one, the market was typically around a couple tens of euros per ton of CO2. It declined sharply after the subprime crisis in 2009, end of 2008, beginning of 2009, where there was an excess of allowances on the European market as a whole. Everyone had allocations, So they had very few very low value on the market. What changed was in 2018 when we saw increasingly harsher rules that were being thought as per the phase 4, as we were getting closer to the 4th phase of the ETS. People were anticipating harsher regulations and therefore less free allocations, and therefore a stronger urge to source allocation. And that has been keeping the price upwards for the past few years. The entry into phase 4 and a new specific mechanism to destroy surplus of allocations, which is called the Market Stability Reserve. We'll deep dive into that in a minute. So that market has been increasing sharply since 2018, and even COVID-19 and even the Ukraine invasion weren't able to have a long-term impact on those prices. So even major economic events did not damage the overall value of CO2 or the overall cost of CO2. That's for the secondary market, where people trade most of their allocations. There also is a primary market, the ones where states auction allowances directly to emitters. And we have a lot of questions from clients not using that primary market and thinking whether there's a major opportunity for them or not. So we try to summarize how that primary market works. Basically, depending on whether you're in Poland or Germany or elsewhere in the EU, you have different platforms where you can buy allowances over there. And those auctions happen every day in the week from Monday to Friday, apart from a couple of weeks in the year where it's closed. So basically, it's always there, it's always available. And because of that, the spread with the secondary market value is basically none. So unless you want to bet against that spread, there's no clear economic incentive to try to source your allowance on the primary market. It doesn't make a big difference in terms of price. That's to try to provide a macro view of how the market works as a whole. But typically, when you're an emitter, you're interested in two specific metrics. What are your emissions and what are your free allocations or free allowances? Your emissions can be quantified in three ways. The first one being a clear calculation, which is basically trying to go back to the physical reality of your plant, either with a chemical equation or a carbon mass balance. If you're able to describe the carbon flows on your plant, then that's a way to report your emissions. Or you can measure your emissions with instrumentation. Or you can do a third method, a backup method, which is alternative method, where you're not using the physical approach to quantify your CO2 emissions. You're using proxies of measurements or proxies of calculation, which, as long as you can demonstrate you're within a certain range, is okay to use as a way to report emissions. That's to report how much you've been actually emitting. Now, there's another metric which is key, which is how much can you get for free? And that how much can you get for free? There's four ways to answer that question. Either through a product benchmark, where you say what you produce and how much of it you produce, and you get a right for a certain number of allowances depending on that. Through what we call the heat and or the fuel benchmark, based on basically your energy consumption of the plant, your thermal energy consumption of the plant. And if none of those are able to work and you're able to demonstrate that none can apply to your plant, then you go to the process emissions. Sorry if I was candidly explaining stuff that everyone already knew. I just want to make sure everyone has a common understanding before we dive into the specific changes that we've seen in the last few months.
Okay, so now moving on to the main changes that took place over the last few months. There have been four main modifications concerning the EU-ETS directive, the new sectors which are going to be included, the market stability reserve, and also the carbon border adjustment mechanism. And so now I'm going to explain a little bit more in detail. Everyone each one of these 4 points. So first, there has been a general revision of the EU ETS directive, which increases the ambitions of the ETS to align them with the European package Fit for 55. So one of the main evolution is that the new target for the sectors included in the ETS is to reduce the emission of 62% by 2030, which means that they're going to have to reduce the emission at a pace of minus 4.4% per year. In addition, the most emissive sites could be penalized, as well as the sites which are not compliant with their energy audit. This means that this is a big risk which needs to be anticipated by the industrials, but it could also be considered as an opportunity, because now is really the time to put in place a real strategy about the allowances and about decarbonizing the industry. So I said that there could be the most emissive sites could be penalized. So it means that the new EU ETS directive introduces 2 cases in which the sites could lose 20% of the volume of their free allowances. So the first possibility is if a site belongs to the bottom 20% of the benchmarks. It means if there are the 20% sites which emits the most CO2 in the benchmark, then they could lose 20% of their allowances. If they want to avoid this loss, they need to produce a climate neutrality roadmap with actions that they're going to implement in order to reduce their emissions. Another case in which they could lose 20% of the free allowances if a site is subject to a mandatory energy audit and that they are not performing the audit, or that they are not implementing the recommendation of the audit, then they could lose 20% of their allowances. But then can also to avoid this loss, they can also prove, give justification to say why they couldn't implement the recommendation of the audit, and this could be, for example, financial difficulties, or the fact that they took other measures, or that the return on investment is longer than 3 years. We took the business case of a small steel producer, which produces 100,000 tons a year. For this producer, if it was to lose 20% of its free allowances, it could represent a 2.3 million euros a year loss on free allowances. The second point concerns the 4 different sectors which will be added in the scope of the EU ETS. So first is the maritime sector. For the maritime sector, all emissions emitted in the European Union plus 50% of the emission from the transit from the EU and to the EU will be included in the EU ETS. Concerning the aviation sector, until now the sector had 100% of free allowances, but this is going to change because they will slowly phase out of this free allowances system and until 2026, where 100% of the emissions will have to be covered by allowances. Then there will be a new, a separate ETS, which will be called ETS II, which will be implemented for buildings, transport, and industrial heat emissions. But this will only take place in 2027 or in 2028. So there are some risks which need to be anticipated regarding these modifications. First, because new sectors are going to join the ETS, there is a risk of increasing tension on the market, and there's also a risk that other costs will increase due to import and export costs. So the opportunity here, which is to consider, is to explore carbon emission reduction pathway as soon as possible. Moving on to the carbon border adjustment mechanism. So this is a mechanism that is trying to make sure that the products which are imported to the EU have to pay as much price on carbon as was produced here locally in the EU. And so the imports will have to pay for the CBAM according to the emission, the scope 1 emission of their products. So the free allowances will reduce at the same time in the EU, meaning that the price you have to pay on carbon will be the same whether you import something from outside the EU or if you produce it in the EU. And the sectors which are going to be involved are the most intensive carbon sectors. So, of course, there is a risk because they are going to lose some free allowances, and there are going to be more expenses on raw materials. The opportunities which could be considered here is that the CBAM is going to protect what's produced in the EU locally, but for the industrials, you have to anticipate the purchasing of raw materials from outside the EU, which are going to be more expensive because of CBAM. So moving on to our next point, so the market stability reserve, its aim is to make sure that there are never too many allowances in circulation, and it has been reinforced this year. So how does the market stability reserve work? If the number of allowances in circulation into the market is over 833 million European allowances, then in the next year, so in the next year's auction, there are going to be 24% less allowances put into the auction. And these 24%, they're going to be stored in the market stability reserve. But they can only be stored up to 400 million European allowances. If it reaches this cap, then the additional allowances, the surplus, will be destroyed. On the other hand, if you have the opposite situation and you have less allowances, if you have a deficit of allowances, so less than 400 million European allowances in circulation in 1 year, then in the upcoming year, the EU can take allowances from the market stability reserve and put 100 million allowances more into the upcoming year's auction. So this is really giving the EU a certain leverage to balance the CO2 prices. So what is happening with the money coming from these auctions? So what are the revenues financing. So, for example, it could it is financing the innovation and the modernization fund. So the innovation fund is funding mainly low carbon technologies in the European Union. There are mainly two types of projects funded, so large scale projects with a total capital expenditure above 7.5 million euros, and small scale projects which have a total capital expenditure between 2.5 million euros and 7.5 million euros. And the modernization fund, which supports the 10 lowest income EU member states. And so this list can evolve every year, of course. So I'm going to focus on 3 projects which have received funding from the small scale project from the European Union. So one is in concerns waste, the other solar thermal energy, and the last one hydrogen. And so these projects are lasting all over a few years. They have received a similar EU contribution as they received approximately 4.5 million euros, but they have very different offsets, since the first one, for example, is offsetting 8% of its CO2 emissions, whereas the second is going to offset more than 50% of its emission. Another way in which the revenues could be used, so it's also as part of the innovation fund. It could be with a carbon contracts for difference. So this mechanism is very close to what we can see right now with the contract for difference in electricity, so for renewable energies. And so this CCFDs would allow players of the market to have more visibility on prices, because the contract would guarantee a CO2 price which is equal to the abatement cost of a given technology. Meaning that if you have an allowance price which is of 88 euros per CO2 ton, and the strike price of your technologies is over 120 euros per ton, then the government would, the member state, would pay the difference to the industrial between these two prices. If then the price becomes, the allowances price becomes higher than the strike price, then the difference will be paid by the industrial to the member state. This is very interesting. This is a very interesting mechanism, since it allows to have a very high visibility on your carbon price. Right now, Netherlands and Germany are putting in place a framework for the CCFD programs. In France, the framework is not clear yet, but it's in discussion. So we are really hoping to see these being developed over the next few months.
So now on, we are going to talk about the market perspectives. The year 2020 to 2023 are said to be the decade of industrial decarbonation. To do so, the EU Commission has decided to decrease the volume of free allowance delivered. So here are several graphs that show the share of free allowance delivered for each sector. We can clearly identify that almost all sectors are facing a decreasing of this free allowance deliverance. One main point is also that the CBAM phase-in allow the free allowance phase-out, while CBAM is protecting domestic production against imports. Also, the carbon price should progressively be more efficient on this sector, which were receiving a lot of free allowance now on. The EU has decided to maintain free allowance on two different sectors which are sensible. So the industrial that are exposed to carbon leakage, but which are not included in the CBAM, and also the urban heating network. If we take a look at steel price and the impact of free allowance disappearance on it. So there is two different charts here. It's showing the carbon cost of 1 ton of steel. On the left, it's for 1 ton of steel consumed in European Union, and on the right part, it's steel that is consumed in a foreign country outside Europe. So the main takeaways are that CBAM will restore competitiveness between EU production and imports. The EU production and imports are gonna progressively pay the correct carbon price, and specifically the same one. If we take the current price and we consider that CBAM has phased in, the carbon cost would represent 16% of steel price in 2035. Regarding the exports, it's something quite interesting. There is no mechanism that are protecting European Union from their competitor. So they would, as free allowances disappear, they will face a tough competition against foreign producers. Carbon cost is going to depend also on the importing countries' ETS for their own production. Now, if we look at the allowance, so either auction or free, Fit for 55 has been adopted, and it's going to create some tension in the market due to the amount of allowance that it's going to reduce. So if we take a look at historical data, we can compare the emission in yellow to the market cap. First of all, the emission has always been under the initial cap. So it has created a stock, which is TNAC. The MSR and the backloading has consequently been decided to reduce this stock. Since 2019, we see that the emission readjusted cap, the emission and the readjusted cap are closer. So sometimes emissions are a little bit higher than the cap, and sometimes a little bit under the cap. So it's creating some tension on the market. And if we take a look at the price, the market price has been risen since 2018, so it's quite close. If we look at the projection, so what's going to happen in the future? First of all, EU Commission has decided to accelerate the decarbonization, setting a new target in 2030, which is a decrease of 62% of emission compared to 2005. So a new linear reduction factor has been decided, and it's way more ambitious. Because of this new cap, a shortage of allowance will appear on the primary market. On every projection, it's appeared. But we have to be careful because the phase 5 has not been decided yet. So the year after 2030 are quite. It may not work as we showed it here. But the main takeaway is that it's gonna there will be a shortage of allowance even in the year to come, and the price may rise by a lot. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Louis Arnaud and Sophie, for this summary. The idea was this webinar was a bit dense, a bit heavy. The idea was to be able to walk you through the majority of changes that we've seen, as well as what the impact could be possibly on the market. So we've been 10 minutes late compared to our schedule. Is there any questions, comments, or feedbacks from the attendance?